Have you ever noticed that a complete stranger can determine your mood for an entire day? Just one disrespectful remark, one contemptuous glance, one comment on social media, or even one cold attitude can be enough to make your mind replay that interaction over and over again dozens of times. The strange thing is that the person who upset you may have forgotten about it within a few minutes, while you continue carrying it with you for hours, days, or sometimes even much longer. So who is really in control of your life? You or anyone who has the ability to touch your emotions? Carl Jung believed that true maturity does not begin when you make the world more pleasant, but when the world gradually loses its ability to control your inner state. This does not mean becoming cold, emotionless, or indifferent to everything. It is a much deeper form of inner strength, where you still fully experience everything that happens, but no longer allow those experiences to pull you away so easily from your own center. In today's video, we are going to explore the subtle reasons why people continually become angry, irritated, and emotionally disturbed by others through the lens of Jungian psychology. More importantly, you will see that every time someone is able to control your emotions, they are not merely taking away a few moments of your peace. They are also, without either of you realizing it, holding a measure of power over your life. And perhaps by the end of this journey, you will discover that the greatest freedom is not living in a world without difficult people, but becoming someone who is no longer easily controlled from within by anyone or anything. Number 1. When your reaction is bigger than the event. There is a paradox that almost all of us have experienced, yet very few of us have ever paused long enough to truly observe it. Some things are incredibly small, lasting only a few seconds, yet they are capable of occupying our minds for hours, days, or sometimes even longer. A casual remark from a coworker keeps you thinking about it endlessly. A cold look from someone makes your entire day feel heavy. A comment from a complete stranger online makes you constantly want to go back, respond, and prove that they were wrong. Yet the strange thing is that other people who witness the exact same event hardly react at all. They hear it and move on. They read it and continue with their work. Their lives simply carry on as usual. If the same event can produce two completely different reactions, then perhaps the more important question is no longer what happened outside, but what was awakened inside each person. This is also where Carl Jung offers a very different perspective on anger, irritation, and the reactions that seem to be caused entirely by external circumstances. From the perspective of Jungian psychology, before trying to change the world, before concluding that other people are too inconsiderate, too selfish, or too unpleasant, perhaps we should take a moment to observe our own reactions. Because many times, what causes us the greatest suffering is not the event itself, but the fact that the event has touched a particularly sensitive place within our minds. Jung called these sensitive points complexes, psychological clusters charged with such intense emotional energy that even a very small trigger can activate an entire inner reaction before consciousness has time to understand what is happening. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Perhaps this is also why so many people come to believe that life always brings them people who are too difficult, too unreasonable, or too good at hurting them. But according to Jung, before consciousness has a chance to speak, the unconscious may already be shaping how we feel, interpret, and respond. That does not mean your emotions are wrong. It simply suggests that your first reaction is not always the whole truth. Every time something very small pulls you into a prolonged state of anger, it may be more than just an unpleasant moment. It may also be an invitation to look more deeply into what has been quietly operating within your own mind. What is important is that a complex does not always reveal itself through major life events. On the contrary, it often appears in the most ordinary moments. Precisely because they are so ordinary, we tend to overlook them. We think we are angry because of what someone said. We think we are hurt because of their attitude. We assume the cause exists entirely outside ourselves. But if you observe more carefully, you may notice that certain seemingly insignificant things carry an extraordinary weight for you alone. And it is that imbalance that deserves your attention. Imagine a vast lake. When the water is calm, a small pebble dropped into it creates only a few ripples before they quickly disappear. But if there is an underground network of hidden caverns beneath the surface, that same tiny pebble may create vibrations that travel far below, completely unseen by anyone standing on the shore. Human beings are much the same. What happens outside is often only the pebble. What determines the intensity of the reaction is not the size of the pebble, but the structure hidden beneath the surface of the mind. Perhaps you have met someone who remains calm in situations that make everyone else lose their temper. It is not because they are emotionally numb, nor because life has treated them more kindly. It is simply because what is happening does not touch one of their sensitive points. Meanwhile, another person may explode over a very gentle piece of feedback. If we only look from the outside, we are likely to conclude that one person simply has a worse temper than the other. But from Jung's perspective, the more interesting question is not who is right or wrong, but rather, why does this particular thing hold so much power over me? I once knew a manager who was exceptionally skilled at his job. In almost every situation, he remained calm and rational. But whenever someone said during a meeting, "Perhaps this approach isn't quite as effective," his entire expression would immediately change. Even though the comment was delivered politely, he would spend the rest of the meeting defending his viewpoint and then continue thinking about it for the rest of the day. What was remarkable was that the other colleagues who heard the exact same remark saw nothing unusual about it. To them, it was simply a normal part of discussing work. The difference was not in the comment itself, but in the reaction. And when the reaction is far greater than the event itself, that is often where we begin to see the traces of a complex. This is also why many people spend years trying to change their circumstances, yet continue falling into the same emotional patterns. They change jobs, change environments, change relationships, yet whenever a similar situation appears, the familiar anger and irritation return once again. It is not because the world is constantly working against them, but because the same sensitive point continues to be activated in different forms. Perhaps the very first step toward no longer being so easily controlled by anyone or anything is not learning to react less, nor forcing yourself to stay calmer. The first step is simply learning to become curious about your own reactions. Instead of immediately asking, "Why did they say that to me?" try replacing it with a deeper question. Why does this particular thing hold so much power over me? That is not a question meant to blame yourself, nor is it meant to excuse the behavior of others. it is an invitation to begin a far more important journey. Because according to Carl Jung, the moment a person begins observing their own reactions with curiosity, instead of merely chasing after whatever triggered them, is also the moment they begin moving from a life directed by external stimuli toward a more conscious way of living. And perhaps that is also the very first step toward what so many people have been searching for all along. An inner life strong enough that the world can no longer so easily determine what happens within them. Number 2. Do not absorb other people's emotions. And then, once you begin to realize that not every intense reaction is created by the event itself, you may discover something even more subtle. Sometimes what steals your inner peace is not your own emotions, but someone else's emotions quietly entering your inner world without you even realizing it. There are days when you wake up feeling completely normal. Your mind feels light, your work is going according to plan, and there is nothing in particular to worry about. But the moment you walk into the office, sit next to someone who is irritated, or attend a meeting where everyone is tense, you suddenly begin to feel weighed down as well. No one has said anything to you. No one has criticized you. Nothing has happened to you directly. Yet within just a few minutes, your breathing becomes more hurried, your mind starts to feel uneasy, and you carry that state with you for the rest of the day. What is worth noticing is that many times those emotions did not truly begin with you. They simply happened to find a place to settle within you before you realized you had unconsciously begun carrying them. Modern psychology calls this phenomenon emotional contagion, the transmission of emotions. Human beings do not communicate only through words. We are also constantly influencing one another through our emotional states. A tense facial expression, a hurried tone of voice, or an atmosphere filled with anxiety can unconsciously cause the nervous systems of those nearby to adjust accordingly. This explains why simply walking into a room where everyone is panicking can make you start feeling uneasy yourself, even though just a few minutes earlier you were completely calm. It happens so quickly that many people mistakenly believe the emotion that has just appeared actually belongs to them, when in reality it is simply a natural response to the emotional atmosphere surrounding that space. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Perhaps this is one of the deepest observations about the nature of human relationships. Every time people meet, it is not only words that are exchanged, but psychological states that quietly spread as well. But what Jung wanted to emphasize was not that we should fear this influence. More importantly, we should recognize that being influenced does not mean being carried away. Two chemical substances may come into contact, but that does not mean one of them completely loses its own nature. There is a beautiful story in the Bible about Jesus on a boat in the middle of a storm. As the wind grew violent and the waves crashed relentlessly against the boat, all of the disciples became terrified. They believed they were about to sink into the sea. One person's fear quickly became everyone's fear. No one remained calm enough to assess the situation clearly. Yet Jesus alone remained at peace in the midst of that storm. What is most thought-provoking is not the miracle that followed, but his inner state before the storm was calmed. The storm outside did not immediately become a storm within him. Precisely because he did not absorb the panic of the crowd, he was able to become the anchor from which peace spread back to everyone else. It is also a profound image of the strength possessed by a mind that refuses to let collective emotions determine its own inner state. Perhaps all of us have stepped into two completely different rooms at some point in our lives. One room where people speak gently, listen to one another, and smile. After spending only a few minutes there, you find yourself feeling more relaxed. The other room is filled with sighs, complaints, and invisible tension. Before long, you begin to feel heavy yourself, even though nothing at all has happened in your own life. This shows that emotions spread much like the scent of perfume in the air. When you walk into a room filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, your clothes may carry that fragrance with them when you leave. But the scent clinging to your clothes does not mean it has become the nature of the clothes themselves. Other people's emotions are much the same. They may touch you, but that does not mean they have to become your emotions. Many people unconsciously live like sponges. They absorb the anger of their co-workers, the worries of their family members, the pessimism of their friends, and even the tension carried by the daily news. By the end of the day, they are exhausted without understanding why. They believe they are tired because of their own lives, when in reality they are carrying countless emotions that never truly belong to them. The unfortunate part is that when this continues long enough, people gradually forget what their own natural state of peace feels like and begin believing that constant stress is simply part of their personality. The interesting thing is that an irritable person does not force you to become irritable. Someone who is panicking does not mean you have to panic as well. It is much like standing beside someone who is crying. You are not required to cry with them. Empathy is not the same as identification. You can recognize that someone else is suffering without turning their suffering into your own permanent emotional state. You can remain close to someone filled with anger while still maintaining enough clarity to truly listen to them instead of immediately being pulled into that same anger. Perhaps this is one of the most important capacities of inner maturity. It is not the ability to change other people's emotions, nor is it the attempt to make the entire world more positive. It is the ability to remain centered while standing in the midst of many different emotional states. Because if every person who passes through your life is able to determine your mood, then your peace will always depend on whom you happen to encounter that day. And a peace that must constantly depend upon circumstances will always remain fragile, because the external world has never stopped changing. Perhaps this is also why people with deep inner strength often leave such a unique impression on others. It is not because they have never encountered negativity. They still work in high-pressure environments, still meet hot-tempered people, and still face life's uncertainties, just like everyone else. The difference is that they do not allow every emotion they encounter to become part of their inner world. They understand that emotions can be observed without needing to be possessed. And perhaps, if the ultimate goal of this journey is to reach a day when you are no longer easily angered or emotionally disturbed by anyone, then one of the very first lessons is not learning how to make other people less negative. There will always be days when you must enter places filled with tension and meet people carrying anxiety or disappointment within them. Life cannot promise that it will always place you among comforting sources of energy, but it always leaves you with one small freedom, the freedom to choose what will continue to remain in your own mind. The lesson is much simpler than it seems. Just because an emotion enters your space does not mean you have to open your heart and invite it to stay. Before we move on to the next section, I'd like to ask you a question. Have you ever realized that you carried someone else's emotions with you throughout an entire day, even though those emotions were never yours to begin with? If you have experienced that, share your story in the comments. I would genuinely love to read about your experience, and perhaps your story will help someone else realize that they are not alone on this journey of learning how to protect their own inner peace. Number 3, do not turn assumptions into truth. So, if an emotion does not always begin with you, then is what causes your suffering always what actually happened? There is something remarkably fascinating about the human mind that we rarely notice during the moments when we are most angry. Most of the time, what causes our suffering is not the event itself, but the meaning we assign to that event. Something that lasts only a few seconds can lead to hours of overthinking, not because it was so significant, but because the mind quietly continues writing a story far beyond what actually took place. Consider a very familiar situation. You send someone a message, and several hours later, you still have not received a reply. That is a fact. It simply means the person has not responded yet. But almost immediately afterward, other thoughts begin appearing in your mind. Maybe they're ignoring me. Perhaps they don't respect me anymore. Maybe I did something wrong. Within just a few minutes, from one very small fact, the mind has constructed an entire story, complete with characters, motives, and conclusions. At that point, what hurts you is no longer the unanswered message, but the story you have come to believe is true. This is one of the strangest abilities of consciousness. Human beings do not merely live in the world of events, we also live in the world of interpretations. And sometimes those interpretations carry even greater influence than reality itself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge." Perhaps this brief statement contains a truth we often do not want to face. Observing an event exactly as it is requires tremendous patience. Rushing to conclusions, on the other hand, happens almost automatically. The mind always wants to fill the gaps in information as quickly as possible. When it does not know what has happened, it rarely tolerates uncertainty. Instead, it immediately creates an explanation so that it can feel as though it understands. The problem is that the explanation is not always correct. A friend of mine named Lena once told me that the most difficult period of her marriage began when her husband started coming home late on a regular basis. He simply said that work had become busier than before. At first, she only found it a little unusual, but over time her mind began filling in the missing pieces. She thought perhaps he no longer wanted to come home. Perhaps he had grown tired of her. Or perhaps there was someone else. There was no evidence for any of those possibilities, only silence and assumptions. Yet those assumptions gradually became the lens through which Lena interpreted every action her husband took. A brief reply was seen as coldness. Forgetting to call became indifference. Every late evening strengthened her belief that her assumptions were correct. Without realizing it, she was no longer reacting to what was actually happening, but to the story her own mind had created. Then one day, he was admitted to the hospital after collapsing from exhaustion following weeks of working continuously to prevent his company from laying off employees. Only then did Lena discover that he had hidden all of his stress simply because he did not want his family to worry. What troubled her most was not that she had misunderstood him, but realizing that most of the pain she had experienced during that time had never been created by reality itself. It had been created by the way she interpreted reality. Perhaps this is also what happens in so many relationships. A glance is not necessarily contempt. Silence is not necessarily distance. A rejection does not automatically mean that your worth has been denied. Yet the mind tends to quietly connect these scattered details into a complete picture, gradually forgetting that it is the one holding the brush and painting that picture in the first place. And then, by simply giving yourself a few extra seconds to pause and observe, you may discover that there is always a significant distance between what actually happened and what you believe happened. That invisible distance is where so much anger is born, because most of the time we do not become angry at the event itself, but at the meaning we have assigned to it. When an interpretation repeats itself often enough within the mind, it gradually begins to feel exactly like the truth, even though it has never actually been verified. Perhaps that is why one of the greatest strengths of a mature person is not always correctly guessing what others are thinking, but being humble enough to admit that they may not yet know the whole story. Between I know and I think, there are only a few words of difference, yet that difference can determine the quality of an entire relationship. As long as we confuse those two things, we easily treat assumptions as evidence and unintentionally hold other people responsible for things that exist only within our own imagination. Take a moment to observe the greatest conflicts in your life. Very often, they do not begin with an insulting remark or an obvious action. They begin with a sentence like, "I know what you're thinking." Yet the truth is that we cannot see another person's thoughts. The only thing we can actually observe is their behavior. Everything after that is interpretation. And it is precisely there that the mind quietly begins adding details reality never actually provided. That is also why one very simple question can sometimes calm an anger that is just beginning to form. Is this a fact, or is it only the way I'm interpreting the fact? That question does not require you to deny your feelings. It simply creates a small pause between reality and conclusion. And very often, that tiny pause is enough to prevent an argument that otherwise would have happened. Perhaps the greatest freedom does not come from always encountering kind people or favorable circumstances. It comes from no longer rushing to turn every gap in information into a negative story. When you do not know why someone behaved the way they did, you can choose to wait rather than conclude. When you do not yet have enough information, you can choose curiosity instead of judgment. That does not make you naive. On the contrary, it makes you more faithful to reality. By this point, perhaps you are beginning to see something truly beautiful. At the beginning of this journey, we learned to observe our own intense reactions. Then we learned not to carry other people's emotions as though they were our own. And now we take another step forward, learning not to allow the stories created by our own minds to determine our inner state. Because if a stable inner life is the ultimate goal, then that stability lies not only in managing emotions, but also in clearly distinguishing between three things that may appear similar, but are completely different: what actually happened, what we think happened, and what we feel because of the way we think about what happened. Perhaps this is also when you begin to understand why some people seem so difficult to offend. It is not because they lack emotions, nor because they are always right. It is simply because they no longer rush to sign their name beneath the very first draft their mind has written. They give reality enough time to speak for itself, and many times when the truth finally emerges, they realize that the anger they once believed was inevitable never actually needed to exist at all. Number 4. What you hate in them may also exist within you. If you have begun to distinguish between what is true and what is merely the way your mind interprets reality, then perhaps the next step is even more difficult. Learning to look again at the people who irritate you the most in order to discover what they are awakening within you. There is a paradox that Carl Jung spent a great deal of time exploring. Sometimes, the people who provoke the strongest reactions in us are not the worst people, nor are they the ones who have hurt us the most. They simply happen to embody a quality that we have never allowed ourselves to possess. Because of that, what disturbs us lies not only in who they are, but also in the fact that they are living out a part of ourselves that we have quietly rejected for a very long time. This is also what Jung called shadow projection. When a quality has been pushed out of consciousness for too long, it does not disappear. It simply ceases to be recognized as part of ourselves and begins appearing instead on the faces of other people. Rather than seeing that quality within ourselves, we see it in the person standing before us. And because we do not realize this process is taking place, we easily become convinced that the problem lies entirely with them. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Perhaps this is one of his most famous quotations, but it is also one of the easiest to misunderstand. Jung was not saying that everyone who irritates you is right, nor that every negative behavior should simply be accepted. What he wanted to emphasize is that the intensity of our reactions sometimes reveals far more about our own inner world than about the person standing in front of us. Some people always feel irritated whenever they encounter someone who is highly self-confident and almost immediately conclude that the person is arrogant. Others simply cannot tolerate people who know how to say no, who are capable of setting healthy boundaries, or who remain calm enough to prioritize themselves, because in their eyes, such behavior appears selfish. Yet another person witnessing those exact same behaviors may have virtually no reaction at all. The difference, therefore, does not lie in the person being observed, but in the one doing the observing. Neuroscience also shows that the brain does not receive the world like a camera that simply records objective reality. Instead, it constantly predicts and interprets what it sees based on patterns that have already been formed. The prefrontal cortex works together with numerous networks involved in memory and emotional processing to construct a meaningful story about the person in front of us within a very short period of time. That is why two different people can look at the exact same behavior and reach completely opposite conclusions. Very often, what we react to is not merely the outward behavior itself, but what that behavior unintentionally touches within our own inner world. During a group discussion, I once heard the story of a man named Lucas who constantly felt irritated by his 17-year-old son. The boy loved wearing unusual clothes, learning to play the guitar, painting, and simply did not care what the neighbors thought. Every time Lucas saw his son with a new hairstyle or an unconventional idea, he immediately criticized him. He believed his son was too rebellious, too impulsive, and simply wanted attention. As a result, tension between father and son became a regular occurrence, even though the boy had never actually done anything truly wrong. It was not until many years later, during a reunion with old classmates, that Lucas unexpectedly looked back at photographs of himself as a teenager. Suddenly, he remembered that when he was young, he had also loved painting and had once dreamed of attending art school. But because he was afraid of disappointing his family, afraid of being dismissed as unrealistic, and afraid of having no future, he had given up everything in order to follow the path others had chosen for him. Only then did Lucas realize that what had disturbed him was never his son. What had triggered such a powerful reaction was the fact that his son was living with the freedom Lucas himself had lost many years before. He did not hate his son's uniqueness. He was simply hurting because he saw a part of himself that he had buried long ago, still living naturally within someone else. Perhaps this is also how shadow projection quietly operates throughout life. The part being projected is not always something negative such as selfishness, anger, or arrogance. Very often, what we cannot tolerate in others turns out to be healthy qualities that we have never allowed ourselves to possess. Some people become uncomfortable around those who live freely because they themselves have never dared to live according to their own desires. Others judge decisive people because they have spent their entire lives remaining silent. Still others become irritated by people who know how to value themselves simply because they themselves have spent too many years trying to please everyone else. The interesting thing is that recognizing projection does not mean you must agree with every behavior displayed by other people. Someone truly may behave insensitively or make choices you disagree with. But alongside evaluating that behavior, there remains another question that is far more worth listening to. What are they awakening within me? That is not a question meant to excuse the other person. It is an invitation to return to yourself and discover the parts of yourself that have not yet been fully seen. Perhaps this is also one of the deepest forms of self-mastery that Carl Jung was pointing toward. At that point, you no longer see other people as the cause of all your anger and irritation. Instead, you begin to see every strong reaction as a doorway into your own inner world. Because very often, the person standing before you has not appeared to take away your peace. They have appeared to help you see a part of yourself that is still standing in the shadows. And if the ultimate goal of this journey is to reach a day when you are no longer easily angered or emotionally disturbed by anyone or anything, then perhaps the greatest transformation is not that life will contain fewer people who irritate you. The transformation lies in the fact that whenever someone triggers a strong reaction within you, instead of immediately directing all of your attention toward them, you become calm enough to turn inward and observe yourself. Because very often, what another person unintentionally awakens is not your anger, but a part of your own strength, freedom, or courage that you had forgotten you still carried within you. And as you begin to recognize that, you will gradually discover that the more deeply you understand yourself, the less power other people have to control your emotions. Number 5, do not write the script for other people. And perhaps, once you begin seeing your own unconscious through other people, you will realize that there is still one quiet force causing so many episodes of anger to repeat themselves, even after you are no longer dominated by complexes, no longer absorbing other people's emotions, and no longer rushing to interpret or project. That force is the silent script we write in our minds about how other people are supposed to behave. There is something very strange about human relationships that almost everyone has experienced. We rarely love, help, or connect with other people based solely on what is actually happening. Alongside who they truly are, another version of them always exists within our minds, a version built upon countless invisible shoulds. A close friend should remember our birthday. A partner should automatically know we are upset without us having to say anything. Children should appreciate everything their parents have sacrificed for them. Someone we once helped should treat us kindly when we are the ones in need. These shoulds are rarely spoken aloud. They exist so quietly that we often forget they are merely our own expectations and have never been part of a contract the other person knowingly agreed to sign. The problem is that the more scripts we write for other people, the more our emotional state depends upon whether they perform their assigned roles correctly. If they behave exactly as we expect, we feel loved, respected, and appreciated. But the moment they step even slightly outside that script, disappointment, irritation, or hurt quickly appear. The remarkable thing is that many times the other person has absolutely no idea what they supposedly did wrong. They are simply living according to their own way of being, while we are silently comparing their behavior to a script that only we ourselves have ever read. Carl Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Perhaps what is worth reflecting on in this quotation is not merely the word meaning, but also the fact that human beings constantly assign meaning to other people's actions. When someone forgets to call us, we do not simply see that they forgot to call. We easily interpret it as proof that we are no longer important to them. When someone declines our request, we do not merely see a refusal. We tend to assign it the meaning that we no longer matter to them. And then, from the meanings we ourselves have created, another script quietly begins to unfold. This became especially clear in the life of Princess Diana. She longed for a family in which love was expressed through care, understanding, and emotional presence. That was the image of marriage she carried within her heart. But reality unfolded differently. Every time Prince Charles behaved in a distant, emotionally detached manner, or failed to respond to her emotional needs as she had hoped, the pain came not only from his actions, but also from the distance between the man he truly was and the person Diana had hoped he would become. Many scholars who later studied her life observed that the more tightly she held on to the version of the marriage that should have been, the more difficult it became for her to accept the man who actually stood before her. That very gap nourished much of the disappointment and suffering she experienced throughout the years that followed. Perhaps every one of us has carried such a script without even realizing it. The remarkable thing is that we spend enormous amounts of time revising other people's lines, even though they have never once been given a copy of the script. Then, when they behave differently from what we expected, we become surprised, disappointed, or even angry, as though they had ruined a performance that, in reality, existed only within our own imagination. Perhaps this is also why so much anger does not begin with what other people do, but with one tiny sentence inside our minds. They should have. They should have remembered. They should have understood. They should have known this mattered to me. They should have acted differently. The moment that phrase appears, the real person standing before us almost immediately disappears, replaced by the version we wish they would become. And from that moment on, we are no longer reacting to reality itself, but to the distance between reality and our own expectations. There is in fact a paradox worth reflecting upon. Most of us believe that what hurts us is another person's actions. But if you observe more carefully, you may notice that the pain usually appears only when those actions collide with a version of reality we had quietly expected all along. If your friend had forgotten your birthday from the very first day you met, perhaps you would have regarded it as only a minor detail. But if you had already convinced yourself that a close friend should always remember that day, your emotional response would become completely different. What changed was not the event itself, but the distance between reality and the script you had written. Perhaps that is why, as people mature, they gradually recognize a truth that is both very simple and very difficult to accept. We cannot build our inner peace upon the assumption that other people will always behave according to our expectations. Every person is living within their own inner world, carrying priorities, worries, and experiences that we cannot fully see. What seems completely obvious to you may never have existed within their frame of reference. What you believe everyone should understand may simply be something they were never taught to understand. The interesting thing is that once you let go of the phrase "they should have," a great deal of anger quietly loses its power. Not because other people suddenly change, but because you are no longer unconsciously forcing them to become the version you imagined. For the first time, you begin seeing who they truly are, instead of who you wish they would be. Only then do relationships finally have the opportunity to be built upon reality rather than upon unspoken expectations. Imagine holding a transparent sheet of paper covered with words you wrote yourself. Every time you meet someone new, you unconsciously place that sheet in front of their face. You no longer see them directly. Instead, you see them through sentences like, "My partner should understand me," "Friends should always remember," or "People I helped should be grateful." Whenever they behave differently, you believe they have disappointed you. But in truth, what has just shattered is not who they are. What has shattered is only the transparent sheet you placed in front of them long ago. Perhaps this is also one of the deepest expressions of the inner freedom Carl Jung continually encouraged people to pursue. It is the day you stop living alongside the imaginary version of other people created by your own mind and become calm enough to meet them as they truly are. From that moment on, anger gradually loses the ground upon which it once stood, because you are no longer handing over the authority to determine your inner state to expectations that were never spoken aloud. And then, as the words "they should have" slowly leave your mind, you begin to understand why some people no longer seem easily angered or disturbed by anyone or anything. It is not because they encounter better people. It is because they have stopped writing scripts for others and have begun allowing life to unfold exactly as it is. That is when the freedom Carl Jung so often spoke about truly begins. Before we continue, I would like to invite you to look back at yourself in a very simple way. If you had to use only one word to describe the expectation you have most often unconsciously placed upon other people, what word would it be? Perhaps it is understanding, care, gratitude, respect, stay, listening, Or perhaps it is an entirely different word. Leave that word in the comments. Sometimes, just one very short word is enough to help us recognize the script we have quietly carried with us for many years, yet never truly called by its proper name. Number 6. Anna's story. The woman who was always waiting for others to respond. And perhaps, after everything we have explored together, there is still one question more worth listening to than any theory. What happens when a person truly stops writing scripts for other people? Sometimes the answer is not found in a psychological concept, but in the very ordinary life of a woman who spent almost her entire life loving others in the way she believed was right. Anna was 52 years old, a high school teacher who had recently retired after more than 30 years in the classroom. In everyone's eyes, she was always the most thoughtful person in the family. She remembered everyone's birthday, from her children and grandchildren to her brothers, sisters, and relatives. Every holiday, she was the first to prepare gifts. Whenever someone faced difficulties, she was almost always the first person to show up. There were weekends when she spent the entire time at her daughter's house, babysitting her grandchildren so her daughter could have a chance to rest. There were late nights when she still answered the phone because a friend was going through a marital crisis. For Anna, loving others had almost become a habit, something so natural that she never once thought of it as sacrifice. But like so many people who live for others, Anna had never realized that beneath all of that devotion, there quietly existed something extremely fragile. She never told anyone that she hoped others would respond in kind. She never demanded that her children be grateful or that her friends treat her in any particular way. Everything happened in silence, and because it was never spoken aloud, it was never acknowledged by anyone. Yet, as the years passed, a quiet belief gradually took root within her. If I am always there whenever others need me, then someday, when I need them, they will naturally be there for me too. Carl Jung once wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." Perhaps this quotation reminds us not only that people are different, but also that each person has their own unique way of loving, caring, and expressing affection. What makes one person feel loved is not necessarily the first thing another person thinks of, but until we recognize that, we easily believe that the way we love is also the way others should love us in return. That winter, Anna underwent a relatively minor surgery. The doctors all assured her that she would recover quickly, but that she still needed to remain in the hospital for a few days for observation. As the hospital bed was wheeled into her room, Anna unexpectedly felt relieved. For the first time in many years, she thought that perhaps this would finally be a period when she could rest and allow the people she had always cared for to take turns caring for her. During those first few days, she often glanced toward the hallway whenever footsteps stopped outside her door. Every time her phone screen lit up, she smiled to herself, thinking that someone she knew had remembered her. But as the days passed, things unfolded very differently. Her daughter was only able to visit for about 20 minutes because she had to pick up her own children from school. Her son made a few brief phone calls before rushing back to work. One close friend sent her a beautiful bouquet of flowers with a heartfelt card, but could not come because she was taking care of her sick husband. As for several other people, the ones Anna had been certain would appear, there was no word from them at all. At first, Anna told herself that everyone was simply busy, but as time went on, that silence grew heavier within her. It was not the surgery itself that caused her pain. Rather, every unfamiliar face that entered and left her room quietly reminded her of the familiar faces she was still waiting for. For the first time in many years, she experienced an emptiness that was difficult to put into words. And it was during those days in that small hospital room that Anna began confronting a truth she had never imagined she would have to face. Anna began counting the number of times her phone screen lit up more often than she counted the days of her recovery. Every message brought both happiness and sadness. Some people asked a few questions and then fell silent. Others sent a heart emoji, but never called afterward. Anna kept telling herself that everyone had their own lives, yet one thought continued quietly returning. If it were me, I would never have left them alone like this. It was at that moment that she realized she had been unconsciously comparing every action of other people to how she herself would have behaved in the same situation. The more she compared, the more disappointed she became, gradually convincing herself that the people she loved had changed. One afternoon, Helen, an old colleague, came to visit Anna. After quietly listening to everything she had to say, Helen asked only one question. Did any of them ever promise to love you in exactly the same way you've always loved them? Anna suddenly fell silent. She searched her memory but realized that no one had ever promised to always remember her birthday, to always be there whenever she was ill, or to care for her in exactly the same way she had always cared for them. The only thing that had existed all along was an expectation she herself had quietly carried. Perhaps this is also what Carl Jung meant when he wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking." Sometimes the will to power does not appear in the form of control, but in the desire for other people to love us according to the very definition of love we have created ourselves. At that point, we are no longer seeing the real person standing before us. We are only seeing the version we hope they will become. For the first time, Anna no longer believed her children had done anything wrong. She simply realized that beneath the joy she found in giving, there had always existed one very quiet belief, that one day life would return everything to her in exactly the same way she had given it away. But people do not all love in the same language. Some express love through time, others through responsibility, others through their presence, while still others know only how to love by quietly doing their best to live well. What caused Anna's suffering was not that her children did not love her. It was that she recognized only one expression of love and unintentionally overlooked all the others. On the day she was discharged from the hospital, her son took time off work to drive her home. Just before the car stopped in front of the house, he quietly said, "Mum, I'm sorry I wasn't at the hospital more last week. I was just afraid of losing my job while the company was laying people off." If this had been the Anna of the past, she probably would have heard only an apology that had come too late. But this time, she heard the anxiety of a son trying to protect his family in the only way he knew how. She smiled, placed her hand gently over his, and simply said, "I understand." That was not the day Anna's family changed. It was the day Anna changed the way she saw her family. From that day on, she still loved, still helped, and still cared, just as she always had. but she no longer quietly waited for others to respond in the same way. And the moment she finally let go of the invisible ledger that had silently kept track of everything she had given, she also let go of so much disappointment. Only then did Anna understand that peace does not arrive when everyone finally performs the role you expected of them. It arrives when you stop writing the script for them. Number 7. Do not turn yourself into an emotional rescuer. And perhaps after you stop waiting for others to love you in exactly the way you wish, there is still a deeper stage of maturity that many people take years to recognize. It is learning to distinguish between loving another person and unconsciously believing that you are responsible for their emotional life. Because there are people who no longer expect anything in return, yet continue living in another role that is even more subtle. The person who always feels obligated to heal everyone else's pain. There is a very common pattern that we rarely recognize. When a loved one encounters difficulties, you not only listen, but also see finding the solution as your own responsibility. When a friend falls into despair, you willingly set aside all your plans and personal needs simply to stay beside them, because somewhere deep inside there is a feeling that is difficult to describe, that if you do not help, then perhaps you have done something wrong. At first glance, all of this looks like kindness, but over time, what once gave your life meaning gradually becomes a burden. You begin staying up late simply to answer phone calls filled with complaints. You are always the one standing in the middle of conflicts, trying to make peace. You carry other people's emotional states with you throughout the entire day until you can no longer distinguish between their feelings and your own. Then one day, you become exhausted. The strange thing is that this exhaustion can very easily turn into resentment. You begin asking yourself why, after doing so much for everyone else, no one truly understands you. But perhaps the more important question is this: did anyone ever actually ask you to carry all of those burdens in the first place? Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Perhaps one of the hardest forms of darkness to recognize is the feeling that we have value only when we are rescuing other people. We often believe we are acting out of love, but sometimes deep beneath the surface, there exists a fear that if we are no longer needed by anyone, our presence will lose its meaning. And it is precisely that fear which continually pushes people into the role of rescuer, even when what others truly need is not someone to live their lives for them. Neuroscience also offers an interesting perspective on this. When we witness another person's suffering, the brain networks associated with empathy can quickly become activated, allowing us to experience part of what they are feeling. This is a vital foundation of compassion. But if that empathy is not accompanied by the emotional regulation provided by the prefrontal cortex, people can easily move from walking alongside someone to carrying their burden for them. Instead of remaining calm enough simply to be present, we begin absorbing all of their pain as though it were our own responsibility. When this pattern continues for too long, the nervous system remains in a constant state of tension, causing exhaustion and emotional depletion, even when our own lives contain no major crisis. I once knew a woman named Sarah who worked as a school counselor. For many years, she was the emotional anchor for her students, her colleagues, and even her own family. Whenever someone encountered a problem, she was the first person they called. Sarah almost never refused. She believed that if she just tried a little harder, everyone would suffer a little less. But after many years, what she felt was no longer the joy of helping. It was exhaustion. There were evenings when simply seeing her phone ring made her feel tired before she even answered it. What surprised Sarah most was that she began feeling irritated by the very people she had once loved so wholeheartedly. Not because they had become more selfish, but because she had unconsciously turned everyone else's pain into her own personal burden. What is worth reflecting upon is that this pattern rarely begins with exhaustion. It begins with a beautiful feeling, being needed. When people come to us every time they are in trouble, we feel useful. The more people rely on us, the more easily we believe that this is proof of both love and our own worth. But over time, the boundary between loving and carrying gradually disappears. You begin carrying other people's difficulties home with you, while your own life quietly slips into second place. There is a paradox that very few people recognize. The more you try to solve every problem on behalf of others, the more you unintentionally take away their opportunity to develop the ability to face life themselves. A child who is never allowed to stand back up after falling will struggle to learn how to keep their balance. An adult who always has someone solving every crisis for them will gradually lose confidence in their own ability to overcome hardship. What begins as an act of kindness can quietly create a dependence that no one ever intended. That is why genuine compassion is not the same as constantly rescuing people. Compassion allows you to remain beside someone who is suffering without taking away their journey of growth. You can listen without needing to provide every answer. You can offer support without needing to control the outcome. You can love deeply while still accepting that there are lessons only life itself can teach them. This is also one of the greatest differences between someone with genuine inner strength and someone trapped in the rescuer syndrome. The first understands that they are responsible only for the way they choose to show up. The second believes they are responsible for the final outcome. It is that belief which keeps them living in constant anxiety. If the other person remains unhappy, they believe they have not done enough. If the other person continues to fail, they believe they have helped in the wrong way. Gradually, every disappointment experienced by others becomes another burden they place upon their own shoulders. But once you truly understand that boundary, you no longer force yourself to fix everything. You still love, still walk alongside others, and are still willing to extend a helping hand whenever someone genuinely needs one. But you no longer see their pain or the outcome of their life as your responsibility. You accept that every human being has lessons only they themselves can experience. And because of that, you no longer become easily angry or disappointed when they choose a path different from the one you hoped they would take, because you understand that it is their journey, not your obligation. Perhaps this is also one of the clearest expressions of inner maturity, loving very deeply, yet no longer losing yourself in someone else's life. Number 8. The need to be right is stealing your peace. Perhaps by now, you are beginning to notice something rather strange. Some forms of anger are not born because someone has hurt us, but because they continue to hold a perspective different from our own, and somehow that disturbs us far more than the original event ever did. There is a profound paradox at the heart of human arguments. Most of them do not continue because the truth has yet to be uncovered. Very often, the truth has already been revealed long ago, yet the conversation goes on. Explanations continue to pile up. New evidence keeps being introduced, and both people become increasingly exhausted. At that point, what is being defended is no longer the original issue. What is being defended is the image we hold of ourselves. The ego struggles to accept the possibility that someone might walk away while still believing they are right. That thought alone is enough to make many people uneasy. So they continue explaining, continue arguing, continue trying to change the other person's perception of them, not in order to discover the truth, but to claim ownership of the correct version of the story. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Perhaps this is not merely an invitation to turn our attention inward, but also a reminder that the more we concern ourselves with what other people think of us, the more power we hand them over our inner state. When our attention is constantly directed outward in search of agreement, the ego easily becomes angry with anyone who disagrees. But when you begin turning inward, you realize that what truly needs to be clarified is not the other person's thinking, but why you need them to agree with you so badly. If you genuinely understand and stand firmly in what you believe, can someone else's differing opinion still disturb your inner peace? Try observing what happens during a perfectly ordinary disagreement. At first, you simply want to explain your perspective so the other person can understand more clearly. That is an entirely natural motivation. But then they still disagree. Instead of stopping, you begin searching for more examples. They continue shaking their head. You present even more evidence. They still refuse to change their mind. By then, the conversation has fundamentally changed. You are no longer listening. You are no longer sincerely interested in discovering what is true. All of your energy has become focused on a single goal, making the other person change their mind. The strange thing is that the more you try to control another person's perception, the more you lose control over your own inner state. This brings to mind one of the most famous tragedies in world literature, Captain Ahab in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. After losing his leg to the great white whale, Ahab no longer saw the hunt as a means of survival. He turned it into a battle to prove that he could conquer the very thing that had once defeated him. Every warning to stop became meaningless. Every danger was ignored. By the end, his true objective was no longer the whale itself, but the victory of his own ego. Ahab could not accept that there might exist something in the world beyond his control. In the end, it was this obsession with triumph that dragged both his ship and his entire crew to the bottom of the sea. What destroyed him was not the power of Moby Dick, but the ego's inability to tolerate the possibility that some things in life will never submit to one's own will. Perhaps this is also what the ego struggles most to accept. It constantly whispers that if the other person continues holding on to their viewpoint, then you have somehow failed. But life has never functioned like a courtroom where every matter must end with a final verdict. Every human being sees the world through completely different experiences, memories, and beliefs. That is why two people can witness the exact same event and still walk away with entirely opposite conclusions. You have every right to express what you sincerely believe is true, but you do not have the right to decide what another person will believe after hearing you. The moment you attempt to do so, you enter a battle that no one can truly win. This also explains why so many arguments have long since ended externally, but continue unfolding inside the mind. The other person has already walked away, yet you continue imagining that if only you had said one more sentence, offered one more piece of evidence, or reacted differently, they surely would have changed their mind. Hours later, or even days later, you are still arguing with someone who is no longer present. At that point, your opponent is no longer the other person. Your opponent is the part of your own ego that still refuses to let go of the need to be recognized as right. That need is like someone desperately trying to force a compass needle to point in the direction they prefer. Every time the needle shifts away, they push it back with their hand. But the tighter they hold it, the less capable it becomes of showing the way. It is the same with the human mind. The more you try to control how others see you, the more you lose your own inner balance. Peace is not destroyed because other people think differently. It is destroyed because you refuse to allow them the right to think differently. Carl Jung never encouraged people to abandon the truth or compromise with what is wrong. What he pointed toward was a level of consciousness mature enough to distinguish between two entirely different things: speaking honestly about what you believe and forcing other people to believe it as well. The first belongs to integrity. The second belongs to the ego. When those two become confused, every conversation easily turns into a battle for cognitive victory. Perhaps that is why, after every disagreement, the most important question is not, who was right in the end? But rather, did I preserve my inner peace, or did I allow a different opinion to pull me into hours or days of frustration? Because very often, what prevents us from letting go has never been the event itself, but the need to make someone else change their mind. When you look deeply enough, you realize that you are no longer defending the truth. You are defending the ego's image against the possibility of being rejected. Eventually, there comes a stage in the journey of maturity when you realize that not every opinion needs to be conquered, nor does every misunderstanding need to be erased. There will always be people who walk away while continuing to hold their own perspective, and that does not diminish your worth, nor does it make the truth any smaller. The moment you no longer treat changing another person's perception as a condition for your own peace, is the moment they gradually lose the power to make you angry or emotionally unsettled. And perhaps this is one of the clearest expressions of the inner freedom Carl Jung continually pointed people toward. Not winning every argument, but no longer allowing any argument to steal the peace within you. Now we have made it more than halfway through this journey, and I want to thank you for your meaningful presence. Before we continue, pause for just a moment, take a slow breath, and listen to the rhythm of your own heartbeat. If this message has resonated with you, take just a second to like the video. Sometimes, a single like does more than help a video reach more people. It may become the opportunity for someone trapped in endless arguments to stop and ask themselves, what do I truly want? To be validated or to be at peace? And perhaps that one question alone is enough to change the way they see themselves. Number 9. Peace does not mean endurance. Perhaps by now you realize that the journey toward no longer becoming easily angered does not truly end once we stop needing others to agree with us. Life will always contain people who intentionally or unintentionally cross important boundaries. And when that happens, another quiet question emerges. Does preserving inner peace mean accepting everything, or is it precisely a mature inner life that knows how to say no at the right moment without losing its composure? Many people, once they begin learning not to let others control their emotions, fall into another extreme. They begin believing that peace means remaining silent, that maturity means enduring everything, and that the less they react, the closer they are to inner freedom. Yet over time, that silence fails to bring the peace they expected. It gradually becomes endurance. They swallow insults, tolerate disrespectful behavior, and constantly remind themselves that they should not become angry. But what is suppressed never truly disappears. It simply changes form. Their anger no longer erupts outwardly, but quietly accumulates inside, until one day it overflows because of something very small. What robs them of peace is not the anger itself, but the fact that they never learned how to establish clear boundaries before anger became necessary. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Perhaps this quotation reminds us not only that our past does not define who we are, but also points toward an important choice in the present. Every time someone crosses one of your boundaries, there are always several possible responses. You can explode, you can silently endure. But there is also a third path, far more mature than either of those. Calmly stating what you will accept and what you will not accept. That is not the reaction of a wounded ego. It is the conscious choice of someone who understands their own worth. A man I know named David managed a machine shop with more than 30 employees. He was well known for his calm temperament, but for many years, that calmness came with a very unusual habit. Whenever an employee raised their voice at him, acted irresponsibly, or repeatedly broke promises, David simply let it pass. He always believed that arguments would only make matters worse. He told himself they would eventually understand on their own. But things did not unfold that way. The more he remained silent, the more those behaviors continued. Some employees began speaking to him in a rude tone. Others repeatedly arrived late because they knew there would be no consequences. What exhausted David was not the workload itself, but the growing feeling that he was gradually losing the respect he had spent years building within his own workplace. Then one day, a longtime employee once again raised his voice in front of everyone simply because he disagreed with the work assignments. Everyone expected David to remain silent as he always had. But this time, he simply looked at the man and calmly said, "You have every right to disagree with me, but you do not have the right to speak to me in that tone. If this conversation continues this way, we will end it here and continue later when we are both calmer." Then he turned around and walked away, ending the discussion. There was no shouting, no insults, no attempt to prove who was right or wrong. There was only one very clear boundary. Interestingly, from that day forward, the atmosphere in the workshop began to change. Not because David had become more intimidating, but because people finally understood where his boundaries were. David later admitted that what surprised him most was not the change in his employees' attitudes, but the feeling of relief within himself. For the first time, he realized that for years he had confused peace with endurance. He believed remaining silent meant avoiding conflict. In reality, he had simply moved the conflict from the outside into himself. This is also the essence of psychological boundaries. Many people believe boundaries are a way of changing other people. In truth, they are not. A boundary is not the statement, "You must behave this way." A boundary is the statement, "If you continue behaving this way, this is how I will respond." The difference may seem very small, but it completely changes the nature of the relationship. The first statement attempts to control someone else. The second takes responsibility only for one's own actions. A mature person does not build peace by forcing others to change. They build peace by knowing exactly what they themselves will do when something crosses the limits of what they can accept. Perhaps many people still believe that setting boundaries is cold or unkind. But in reality, it is like the fence surrounding a garden. The fence is not built because the garden hates the outside world. It exists so that what is growing inside has the opportunity to flourish. Without a fence, anyone can walk in, trample the young plants, and walk away. In the end, the one that suffers is not the person who entered, but the garden itself. The human inner world is no different. If you never say, "This is not okay," if you never say, "Please don't speak to me that way," if you are never calm enough to walk away from a conversation that has fallen below the minimum standard of respect, then other people will never know where your boundaries lie. And when boundaries do not exist, anger easily becomes the one that speaks on your behalf. That is also why people with genuine inner strength are rarely the loudest voices in the room. They seldom threaten others, rarely argue, and do not spend their time trying to prove how strong they are. But when a boundary has been crossed, they act with clarity. They may end the conversation. They may decline a request. They may leave a relationship that is no longer healthy. Not because they hate the other person, but because they respect themselves. Eventually, you will realize that what truly protects your peace is not the ability to endure more, but the ability to establish clear boundaries before anger has to speak for you. Peace has never come from allowing others to do whatever they please. It comes from no longer needing anger to defend what you could have calmly expressed from the very beginning. When your boundaries are clear enough, many conflicts end before they ever have the chance to grow. And from that point on, you will understand that the greatest strength lies not in silent endurance, but in the ability to protect yourself with the calmness of an inner life that has become truly grounded. Number 10. Do not let a single word define who you are. The deeper you travel on the journey of maintaining your inner stability amid reactions, emotions, and the boundaries within relationships, the more you realize that there is still another quiet source of strength, determining whether other people can truly hurt you. The way you define yourself after every judgment you receive. There is something very strange about the way human beings perceive themselves. We often believe we are evaluating an event, yet within only a few seconds, that event quietly transforms into a conclusion about who we are. You fail a job interview, and almost immediately a voice appears in your mind saying, "I'm such a useless person." Someone rejects your feelings, and your mind instantly whispers, "Maybe I'm not worthy of being loved." A project fails to achieve the expected outcome, and you no longer say, "This project failed." Instead, you say, "I am a failure." Only a few words have changed, yet the distance between those two ways of speaking is the very distance between a person with inner strength and someone who allows life to define them through isolated moments. Carl Jung once wrote, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is not merely an inspirational quote. It also reminds us that human beings were never born to become the sum of every compliment or criticism they have ever received. The journey of maturity is not about collecting the labels other people place upon us. It is about gradually separating ourselves from all of those labels until we finally see the real person behind them. In psychology, this capacity is known as psychological differentiation, the ability to distinguish between experience and identity. An experience tells us what happened. Identity answers the question of who we are. When these two become fused together, people very easily lose their inner freedom. A small mistake becomes a life sentence. A criticism becomes the truth. A temporary failure becomes an identity that lasts for years. Take a moment to observe how we speak to ourselves. When a chef ruins a dish, we simply say that he ruined that particular meal. But when we ourselves make a mistake, many people immediately say, "I can't do anything right." One specific action suddenly becomes an entire identity. Unfortunately, the mind rarely recognizes the difference. It accepts that conclusion as truth and then begins searching for more evidence to support it. Every success is dismissed as luck, while every failure becomes proof that we have always been that way. Neuroscience also helps explain this phenomenon. The brain is constantly trying to construct a coherent story about who we are. The neural networks involved in memory and self-awareness continually connect isolated experiences into an ongoing narrative of who I am. This helps us maintain a stable sense of identity, but it also creates a significant risk. If we repeatedly interpret failures as evidence of our personal worth, the brain gradually reinforces that negative story, causing every future experience to be viewed through the same lens. The fascinating part is that the prefrontal cortex also gives us the ability to re-examine that story, separating a specific event from our identity. It is precisely this capacity that allows people to avoid becoming trapped by the labels created by circumstance. A viewer of this channel named Michael, a 50-year-old construction engineer with more than 20 years of experience, once shared his story with us. During a major project, he made an error during an inspection that forced the construction plan to be revised. The consequences were not especially serious, but during the project review meeting, his supervisor said in front of everyone, "This time you've disappointed us." That single sentence stayed with Michael for months. He continued going to work and completing his responsibilities, yet he no longer dared accept another major project. Every time a new opportunity appeared, he turned it down himself. His co-workers assumed he simply wanted to slow down after years of pressure. Only Michael knew the truth. He was no longer afraid of the work itself. He was afraid of facing the feeling of being a failure one more time. One evening, his son asked him to repair an old bicycle. In less than half an hour, Michael had taken it apart, replaced the damaged parts, and put it back together perfectly. His son looked at him with admiration and said, "Dad, I've never seen anyone fix things as well as you do." That ordinary sentence stopped Michael in his tracks. He suddenly realized that he was still the same man who had accumulated decades of experience, still the person trusted by countless co-workers, still the father everyone turned to whenever they needed help. The only thing that had changed after that meeting was that he had allowed one single moment to define his entire identity. What caused his suffering was not his supervisor's remark, but the fact that he had unconsciously signed his own name beneath that judgment. Perhaps this is also what happens to so many people. A teacher once told you that you were a poor student, and years later, you still hesitate to learn something new. A broken relationship convinced you that you were unworthy of love. Being rejected for one job made you afraid to ever try again. Those words are like stickers placed on a suitcase. At first, they are only small pieces of paper, but if you never remove them, eventually you forget the true color of the suitcase underneath. A human being is not the summary of the worst days of their life. You are not your greatest failure. You are not the harshest judgment you have ever heard. You are not the weakest moment you have ever experienced. Every event is merely one chapter in the long book of your life. No one picks up a novel and decides what the entire story is after reading only one page. So why do we allow a few painful pages to define our entire identity? This also explains why people with genuine inner strength are so difficult to offend. It is not because they have never heard criticism. They still listen, they still reflect, and they are even willing to correct themselves if the feedback is valid. But they do not give any single opinion the authority to decide who they are. They can receive criticism as information without accepting it as a verdict. They understand that other people are evaluating an action, a decision, or a specific outcome. Only when they themselves agree to turn it into an identity does that judgment truly gain power. At some point, you will realize that inner freedom does not begin when other people stop judging you. It begins when those judgments no longer possess the power to determine who you are. You may still make mistakes. You may still be misunderstood. You may still hear harsh criticism, but all of those become experiences to observe rather than verdicts upon your identity. As a result, you no longer live to prove yourself to the world, nor do you allow every compliment to lift you into the sky or every criticism to drag you down. And from that moment onward, you will understand why the less you identify yourself with the world's judgments, the less power other people have to make you angry, hurt, or emotionally unsettled. What they touch is only an event. They no longer reach the deeper core of who you are, the self you have learned to recognize and protect. Number 11. The more rigid your persona, the more easily you are offended. Something very interesting gradually begins to appear once you stop allowing other people's judgments to determine who you are. You begin realizing that what offends you most deeply is sometimes not another person's words at all, but the image of yourself that you have spent so many years trying to protect. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." Although this quotation is usually understood within the context of family life, it also points toward a much broader truth. From a very early age, human beings learn to create an image of themselves in order to adapt to the world. Some learn that they must always excel in order to be accepted. Others believe they must always appear strong in order to earn respect. Still others become accustomed to being the cheerful one, the calm one, or the perfect one in everyone else's eyes. According to Carl Jung, this social image is what he called the persona. It is not something bad. In fact, the persona helps us communicate, work, and live harmoniously within society. The problem begins when the persona is no longer a flexible mask, but becomes such rigid armor that we forget we are wearing it. When that happens, every criticism ceases to be merely a criticism. It becomes a threat directed at the image you are trying to preserve. If you must always be the smartest person in the room, then someone pointing out one small mistake feels like far more than embarrassment. It feels as though your entire identity has been shaken. If you must always remain calm, losing your composure just once may leave you ashamed for days afterward. If you must always appear successful, one ordinary failure can easily become an identity crisis. What hurts you is not the event itself. What hurts you is the crack that has just appeared in your persona. This is also why two people can receive the exact same piece of feedback, yet react in completely different ways. One person simply thanks the speaker, reflects on it for a while, and makes adjustments if necessary. Another carries the words with them throughout the entire night, replaying them endlessly, trying to explain, trying to justify themselves, or quietly nurturing feelings of anger and hurt. The difference does not lie in the feedback itself. It lies in how each person receives it. For one individual, it is merely information worth considering. For the other, it feels like a direct threat aimed at an image they have spent years carefully constructing and protecting. This was vividly reflected in the life of Michael Jackson. For many years, he was not merely an artist, but became the symbol of perfection on stage. Millions of people expected flawless performances, perfectly timed dance moves, and an image that seemed almost beyond criticism. Over time, that pressure became so overwhelming that Michael himself repeatedly spoke about the burden of constantly surpassing his previous performances. Every concert ceased to be merely a performance. It became a defense of the image the entire world expected him to maintain. When the persona becomes such a burden, even a single criticism, one disappointing performance, or one small mistake can create enormous pressure. What is worth reflecting upon is not that Michael was a famous celebrity. It is that anyone can unconsciously live according to the same pattern. The only difference is that our stages are much smaller. Some perform in meeting rooms, others perform within their families, others perform on social media. Yet all of them carry the same fear. Do not let the image I have worked so hard to build begin to crack. Perhaps this is one of the greatest paradoxes of the persona. At first, we create it in order to feel safer, to adapt to the world, and to find our place within relationships. But if we cling to it for too long, the very thing that once gave us security gradually makes us more fragile. The less you allow yourself to make mistakes, the more terrified you become that someone will discover your flaws. The harder you try to prove that you are always calm, the more frightened you become whenever an unexpected emotion appears, and the more determined you are to preserve the image of someone who knows everything, the more difficult it becomes to admit that there are still things you do not know. Imagine a house surrounded by scaffolding during construction. At first, the scaffolding is absolutely essential. It supports the building, protects the workers, and allows each part of the house to be completed safely. But if the house is fully finished, and the owner leaves the scaffolding standing forever, before long, the very structure that once supported the building begins hiding its true beauty. The persona is much like that scaffolding. It helps us adapt to society, but if we keep it for too long, we begin living only to protect the outer structure while forgetting that the real house exists within. Perhaps this is why people with deep inner strength often leave others with such a gentle and natural impression. It is not because they lack a persona. They are still doctors, teachers, business owners, or artists. They still fulfill their roles well in everyday life. The difference is that they no longer identify themselves completely with those roles. They can calmly admit they do not know something. They can smile after making a small mistake. They can comfortably say, "I'll learn more about that." This does not come from low self-esteem. It comes from understanding that one mistake is not enough to tear away the mask. Only those who cling tightly to the mask must live in constant fear that one day it will be stripped away. And perhaps this is also one of the deepest transformations along the journey toward no longer becoming easily angered or emotionally disturbed by anyone. You do not need to destroy your persona, because life will always require us to fulfill different roles. What changes is that you stop treating that role as the entirety of who you are. From that moment onward, other people can criticize the way you work, the way you present yourself, or a particular decision you made without shaking your entire inner world. Because what they touch is only a mask performing its function, not the far greater human being standing behind it. When the persona becomes flexible rather than rigid, you begin to understand why some people seem almost impossible to offend. It is not because they are insensitive to what the world says. It is because they no longer confuse the role they happen to be playing with the person they truly are. Before we move on to the next section together, I would like to leave you with one small question to reflect upon. If there is one kind of criticism that you find the hardest to accept, or one that continues to stay with you long after you hear it, what is it usually about? Is it your abilities, your appearance, your work, the way you raise your children, or simply the feeling that someone believes you are not good enough in some area of your life? Or perhaps it is something entirely different that only you truly understand. If you feel ready, share it in the comments. I would genuinely love to read your story. Sometimes, what hurts us most deeply says far less about another person's criticism than it quietly reveals about the part of our persona that we have spent so many years protecting without ever truly seeing it. Number 12. Read your anger instead of fighting it. What if one day you stopped seeing anger as something that must be eliminated and instead began seeing it as a message trying to lead you toward a deeper truth about yourself? There is something fascinating that many people overlook whenever they talk about inner growth. We spend so much time trying to control our anger, suppress it, or blame ourselves every time we feel angry, as though the mere appearance of that emotion were already a sign of failure. Carl Jung, however, approached the matter from an entirely different direction. He did not see emotions as enemies that needed to be destroyed. He saw them as messengers from the unconscious, carrying things that consciousness had not yet managed to recognize. Carl Jung once wrote, "Emotions are the chief source of all becoming conscious. Emotions are the most important source through which human beings become conscious." Perhaps that is why the most important question has never been, "How do I stop feeling angry?" The more meaningful question is, what is this anger trying to show me that I have refused to see for so long? Perhaps we have become so accustomed to viewing anger as a fire that must be extinguished immediately that we have forgotten every warning signal appears for a reason. When the fuel warning light comes on in your car, you do not try to remove the bulb, so the light disappears. You understand that what matters is not the light itself, but what it is trying to tell you. Anger is much the same. Sometimes it tells you that an important value has just been violated. Sometimes it reminds you that you have tolerated something that no longer fits who you are for far too long. At other times, it quietly tells you that a legitimate inner need has been neglected for years. Yet most of us see only the flames of emotion while forgetting to listen to the message behind them. I once knew the story of a 43-year-old woman named Emily who worked in customer service. Her co-workers always described her as gentle, pleasant, and someone who almost never argued with anyone. Yet every time a meeting ended with her manager assigning her additional work without asking for her opinion, she felt an overwhelming surge of anger. That anger never exploded outwardly. Instead, it quietly remained inside, keeping her awake at night and occupying her thoughts for days. At first, Emily believed she was simply upset about the workload. But after observing herself repeatedly, she realized that what hurt her most was not the amount of work, but the feeling that her voice did not seem to exist. Every time someone made decisions on her behalf, she unconsciously relived the feeling she had as a child, when adults made every choice for her without ever asking what she truly wanted. For the first time, Emily understood that her anger had not appeared to ruin her life. It had simply been persistently knocking on her door, reminding her that there was still a deep need within her to be heard. And once she recognized that, anger was no longer something to erase. It became a guide. Perhaps this is also something many people have experienced without ever finding the words for it. There are times when you become angry not because an object was damaged, but because your effort was taken for granted. Sometimes you are upset not because someone arrived late, but because you feel that commitment within the relationship is no longer being respected. There are also moments when anger arises over one seemingly insignificant comment, yet what has actually been touched is a value you have quietly protected for many years. If your only goal is to eliminate that emotion, you may miss the most important message your soul is trying to send you. There is a famous lyric from Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence. People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. Perhaps this is true not only of the way people treat one another, but also of the way we treat our own emotions. We notice anger appearing, yet we rarely truly listen to it. We rush to make it disappear before we even understand why it came. And like a message that has never been read, it continues returning in different forms, not to punish us, but simply because what it came to say has still not been heard. Seen in this light, you begin to recognize a remarkable paradox. The harder we try to eliminate anger, the more we remain trapped on its surface. Meanwhile, what truly deserves our attention always lies one layer deeper. Behind every intense emotion, there is usually not just irritation, but also some value calling out for help. Perhaps it is the need to be respected, to be heard, to be treated fairly, or simply the desire to live according to what you believe truly matters. If all you do is fight your anger, you may silence it temporarily, but the message it carries will eventually find another way to appear. It may return as bitterness, prolonged exhaustion, or an emptiness you cannot explain. That is also why Jung never encouraged people to disconnect themselves from their emotions. He understood that the unconscious rarely communicates through logical language. It speaks through symbols, dreams, and emotions. If you continually refuse to listen to that language, many important parts of your inner life will remain forever outside of consciousness. Anger observed with genuine curiosity can open the door to a truth you have not yet had the courage to face. Sometimes what angers you is not the other person, but the fact that you have repeatedly betrayed your own values in order to please everyone else. Sometimes what makes you furious is not that someone else is unreasonable, but that you have quietly accepted circumstances that have no longer been right for you for a very long time. Perhaps that is why truly mature people no longer rush to judge their own emotions. They understand that anger is not always a sign of weakness or a lack of self-control. Sometimes it is simply a reminder that something deeply important within them still needs to be heard. Once you begin treating anger as a messenger rather than a destroyer, many things that once seemed chaotic gradually become clear. You no longer see only the flames of emotion. You begin seeing what has been quietly feeding those flames for so long. Perhaps this is also the turning point Carl Jung wanted people to reach. Not becoming someone who never feels angry, but becoming someone conscious enough to read the message behind every experience of anger. At that point, emotion is no longer something to eliminate, but a guide leading you toward a deeper understanding of yourself each day. Number 13. Do not give your energy to every battle. If the previous section helped you recognize that not every experience of anger should be eliminated, but instead listened to as a message, then the next step is learning to distinguish between the things that truly deserve your energy and the things that are merely trying to lure you into battles that offer no real value. There is a common paradox in life that almost everyone has experienced. We often assume that our energy is drained by major life events, yet very often what truly exhausts us is an endless collection of insignificant things. A cruel comment from a stranger on social media, a sarcastic remark from someone who never intended to listen in the first place, an argument in which both people wanted only to prove they were right, or someone who has already decided to misunderstand you and seems completely uninterested in the truth. Strangely enough, those situations themselves usually last only a few minutes, yet they can continue occupying your mind for hours or even days afterward. The real battle is no longer happening outside. It continues within the attention you continue giving it. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where your fear is, there is your task." But that does not mean every confrontation is your task. Some fears need to be faced in order for us to grow. Others exist only because the ego refuses to let go. Maturity does not consist of being willing to enter every battle. It lies in recognizing which battles truly belong to your own journey. Not every attack deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. And not everyone is open enough to receive the truth no matter how many times you explain it. Within Jungian psychology, there is an important concept that is rarely discussed: psychic energy. Jung believed that all of our thoughts, emotions, attention, and will operate upon a limited supply of psychological energy. Every hour you spend replaying an argument, imagining what you should have said, or repeatedly rereading a stranger's criticism, you are consuming that energy. What is especially important is that the energy wasted on a meaningless battle is no longer available for the things that truly matter: your family, your work, your creativity, your health, or your own personal growth. Cognitive science also offers a thought-provoking observation. Human attention functions much like a spotlight rather than a light illuminating everything at once. Whenever you focus on one thing, countless other things, are temporarily left in the dark. This means attention always comes with a cost. 1 hour spent thinking about someone trying to provoke you is also 1 hour no longer available for the people who genuinely love you. An evening consumed by a meaningless argument is an evening during which you are no longer fully present with your family, or even with yourself. The brain does not merely determine what you think about. It shapes your life through where you continually place your attention each day. During a Jungian therapy session, I once heard the story of a 46-year-old woman named Rebecca who owned a small flower shop. After many years in business, she had received countless positive reviews from customers. Yet the appearance of just one one-star review filled with harsh criticism was enough to ruin her entire day. Rebecca kept opening her phone to read every sentence over and over, trying to figure out what she had done wrong, then began thinking about how she should respond in order to prove that the reviewer had been unfair. What exhausted her most was not the review itself, but the fact that her mind could not let go of it. Then one day, her father, who was already over 70 years old, quietly asked her a single question. Are you taking care of your flower shop, or are you taking care of the thoughts of someone who never wanted to understand you? Rebecca sat in silence for a long time. She suddenly realized that while she had spent hours trapped by one person's opinion, her shop had remained open. Her loyal customers had continued walking in with their usual smiles, and yet all of her energy had been held captive by someone who would probably never return. From that day on, whenever she encountered a similar situation, she no longer asked herself, "Am I right?" Instead, she asked, "Is this truly worthy of my energy?" Perhaps this is why people with genuine inner strength are often misunderstood as being indifferent. In reality, they still notice injustice, they still recognize personal attacks, and they still know when someone is deliberately trying to provoke them. The difference is that they no longer allow every person or every circumstance to decide how they must respond. They understand that attention is much like an investment fund. If you continually pour it into places that are certain to produce nothing worthwhile, eventually what becomes depleted is not only your time, but also your peace and your inner strength. Therefore, before entering any conflict, they consider not only what they could say, but whether that battle is truly worth sacrificing their inner state. Some victories may make you appear more correct in the eyes of others, but sometimes choosing not to enter the battle gives you something far greater: the freedom from becoming easily angered or emotionally disturbed by anyone. Eventually, there comes a stage when the way you see every conflict changes completely. Your first question is no longer, "How do I win?" but rather, "What will this battle take away from me?" That moment marks a profound level of maturity. You understand that some things must be faced because they concern your dignity, your responsibilities, or your deepest values. But there are also conflicts that exist only to consume your attention and pull you away from the life you truly want to build. From the day you begin asking yourself, "Is this really worth my energy?" many people remain exactly the same. Many circumstances remain exactly the same, yet they no longer possess the power to control your inner state as they once did. And this is also one of the clearest expressions of the inner freedom Carl Jung continually pointed people toward. Not because life has run out of difficult people or frustrating situations, but because you have stopped giving your energy to every battle. And it is precisely from that point onward that you gradually arrive at the state where other people can no longer so easily make you angry or disturb your peace. Number 14. When the world no longer controls what is within you. And perhaps, after looking long enough at everything you have been through, you will realize that the deepest transformation has never been in the way the world treats you. Life will always contain people who agree with you and people who oppose you. There will still be good days intertwined with difficult ones. What truly changes is the place from which you begin to live. There was once a time when almost every one of your reactions originated from the outside world. But eventually, that center quietly shifts inward. And it is precisely this shift that Carl Jung regarded as one of the most significant turning points on the journey toward wholeness. In Jungian psychology, the self is not a new personality that you strive to become. It is the center of the entire psychological life, the place where the seemingly opposing parts within a person gradually find a greater order. As long as the ego occupies the center, it is constantly trying to protect its own image. It continually compares, defends, seeks validation, and reacts to everything that threatens the identity it is trying to preserve. But when the self gradually becomes the center, life no longer revolves around protecting an image. It revolves around living in alignment with the truth within yourself. This transformation rarely arrives with a dramatic turning point. Other people may still see the same familiar person, but the way you experience life is no longer the same. There will be days when things unfold differently than you expected. Someone misunderstands your good intentions. A conversation ends in silence, or a door you hoped would open suddenly closes. In the past, your mind would immediately turn those events into conclusions about who you were. But as your psychological center gradually shifts toward the self, you begin seeing them for what they truly are, simply experiences to move through, no longer evidence by which your worth should be defined. Carl Jung once wrote, "The attainment of wholeness requires one to stake one's whole being. Wholeness requires a person to be willing to place their entire being upon that journey. That also means you cannot continue building your identity upon things that are constantly changing. If your self-worth depends upon the world's reactions, then every change in the world has the power to trigger an inner crisis. Only by finding an anchor deeper than every circumstance can a person stop being carried away by each small fluctuation in life." Imagine a wheel spinning at tremendous speed. The rim never stops moving. Every rotation creates vibration and constantly changes its position. Yet at the very center, there is an axle. Every movement revolves around it, while it itself remains almost completely still. If that axle loses its stability, the entire wheel begins shaking and can no longer function properly. The human psychological life is no different. The outside world resembles the rim of the wheel, always moving, always changing, always bringing unexpected circumstances. The self resembles the axle at its center. It does not stop life from changing, but it prevents every change from pulling you away from yourself. A woman in her 50s once shared that her marriage ended after more than 20 years together. The first years following the divorce were incredibly difficult. Every time she learned that her former husband had moved on with his life, she found herself asking what she had lacked, what she had done wrong, and why she had not been enough to make him stay. Nearly all of her thoughts revolved around evaluating herself through someone else's choices. But years later, after a long journey of confronting herself honestly, she happened to meet her former husband again. He was with his new partner. She said that in that moment, her heart still sank slightly. The sadness remained, and so did the memories. But for the first time in many years, she no longer saw what had happened as a judgment upon her own worth. She simply smiled to herself and thought, "That is his life, and this is mine." The difference existed in only one very small thought, yet it reflected an enormous transformation. Before, the center of her life rested within someone else's choices. Now, that center had returned to herself. Not because she had become emotionally numb, nor because every wound had completely disappeared. It was simply that someone else's story no longer determined the story she told herself about her own life. But that transformation rarely begins with one great awakening. It is built through countless small choices in everyday life. Every time you remain calm instead of reacting immediately, every time you accept something that cannot be changed instead of trying to control it, or every time you refuse to let a temporary emotion determine your actions, your psychological center shifts just a little closer toward the self. It is precisely these quiet changes that gradually shape a person whom circumstances can no longer sweep away as easily as before. Perhaps this is why maturity in Jungian psychology has never been measured by the ability to control the world. It is measured by the ability to remain inwardly stable when the world does not unfold according to your wishes. Anger may still arise, but it no longer dictates your choices. Disappointment may still visit, but it no longer becomes the measure of your worth. Circumstances continue changing every day, yet they gradually hold less and less power over your inner world. It is an extremely quiet process, one without dramatic breakthroughs for the world to notice. Only one day, when you look back, do you suddenly realize that you have walked through situations that once would have shattered you, yet this time you simply smiled gently and continued forward. Perhaps this is also what Carl Jung devoted his entire life to exploring. Not how human beings could avoid suffering, but how they could stop losing themselves every time suffering appeared. The world will continue changing, just as it always has. People will continue coming and going. Success and failure will continue taking turns. But one day, all of those changes will no longer be powerful enough to pull you away from your own center. And perhaps that is the true meaning of master this. It is not mastering other people. It is not mastering circumstances. It is no longer allowing anyone or anything to master the world within you. At that point, you will understand that the greatest strength does not lie in life finally becoming easier. The greatest strength is that even while the world continues changing around you, you remain with yourself. And perhaps that is the closest thing to the wholeness Carl Jung devoted his life to pursuing. Perhaps after everything we have explored together, you will realize that the goal of this journey was never to learn how to stop feeling angry. Anger, like every other emotion, is a completely natural part of being human. What truly changes is that you no longer allow every emotion that arises to take control of the way you live. You begin recognizing what needs to be listened to, what needs to be released, and what is merely an old reaction repeating itself in a new situation. A person who is no longer easily disturbed by anyone resembles someone holding the steering wheel firmly while driving along a road filled with countless turns. Traffic continues moving, the weather continues changing, and unexpected rough stretches of road will always appear. But the direction of travel is no longer determined by every gust of wind or every obstacle ahead. It is determined by the hands holding the wheel. Perhaps this is also what Carl Jung wanted people to discover. True strength does not lie in making the world stop testing you, but in reaching the point where the world no longer has the power to pull you away from yourself. And if there is one thing worth remembering most after this journey, perhaps it is this. Every time you stop giving other people the power to determine your emotions, you reclaim another piece of the freedom you have unconsciously surrendered for so long. Little by little, you not only become less easily angered, but you also become calmer, wiser, and freer from within. If this video has given you a new perspective on mastering your emotions and inner life through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology, take a moment to subscribe and join this channel for the journeys ahead. And if you believe what you heard today could help someone who is being tormented by anger, emotional wounds, or unconscious reactions, share this video with them. Perhaps it will become the beginning of a quiet transformation, powerful enough to change an entire life.